The year is 1991. You're a successful businessman and you're looking to purchase a brand new car. So what other car than a flagship BMW model? You are balling on a bit of a budget though, so you opt for the 735 IL instead of the 750 IL. But either way, still a pretty damn nice car at the day. Just debuted, Iceland green, parchment interior. I'm not sure why you chose that, but fast forward to 2023, a whopping 32 years later, and you have this, a nice weathered 7 Series. So let's find out how this luxury sedan holds up to the test of time. Is it still a luxury car? Is it still innovative? How does it drive? Let's find all this out and take this thing for a spin. So let's put ourselves back in 1991 for a second here. How cutting edge and technologically advanced was this 7 Series? Well, for around $60,000, believe it or not, in 91, you got quite a few options in these IL models. BMW always is pretty advanced when it comes to their technology and stuff, and that's why in the modern world they're a bit of a nightmare, but we'll get into that later. So what are some features that we have in this $60,000 flagship car? Well, you have dual zone climate control, which has been a thing for BMW since the 80s. I don't know if an E28 would have had it, but I know the E34 has had it, so that's pretty much standard. You get dual climate control, power moonroof, power windows all around, power seats, you get memory seats. This driver's seat is actually not only heated but also lumbar support. So for a flagship car, you got lumbar support in the 90s, which is pretty cool because even today a lot of cars don't even have that. So that's a pretty cutting edge thing. Not only in the electric seats do you have main functions, but you have electric headrests, front and rear, which is pretty astonishing even by today's standards. I don't know if people just think it's kind of a dumb novelty, but you really will not find electric stuff like that in anything other than really luxury cars, BMW 5 and 7 Series, Mercedes-Benz. You won't, that's not something that kind of became standard over the years, like a lot of other features that this car might have does. You had a power dimming, or I guess not power dimming, but you had a dimming adjustable rear view mirror, which is no longer installed in this car because it broke. Go figure. You had electric rear seats, which to me is probably the most flagship part about this entire car, because that is pretty cool. I've never seen electric rear seats in anything really to this day, given I'm not riding around in Maybachs or anything, but that is, I think, a pretty sweet feature for this car. And like I said, electric rear headrests. You have a rear sunshade so that the rear passenger can be sheltered and from the sun. You have power side view mirrors, pretty standard on most BMWs of this era. Central locking, obviously. You have extended leather in the center console area, which is specific to the flagship 7 Series, which is actually pretty nice over the traditional vinyl that they give you. Leather inserted door cards, leather extended door panels. You got premium sound, which in today's day and age isn't all that premium. You have chrome trim finishing all the bumpers, which is pretty beautiful. Headlight washers, and other than that, I can't really think of many other features that this car has that are, tech and stuff like that. Pretty traditional. I would say, and again, someone that wasn't around in 1991, I think these would be impressive features of the day, but nothing really crazy. But you're talking early 90s. I mean, we just came out of the 80s, so I can't imagine that people aren't blown away by electric adjusting rear seats and headrests and power windows all around. And I mean, I've had cars or seen cars from the 2000s with manual windows, manual sunroof. So all that stuff to be electric, which again is pretty standard in most BMWs of this era, is still pretty impressive, and you got to give them that. Heated door locks, that's pretty sweet. But otherwise, that's about it for tech features in this car. Pretty technologically advanced, I'd say, for the age. You have a lot of modules that do a lot of different things that I could get way nerdy into, general module, relay modules that allow the car to run all sorts of things in safe ways. If there's too much power, it'll cut your GM, which will cut your power windows and stuff, so you don't melt fuses and all that. it has a lot of cool features that are underneath what we're even talking about here. But a lot of that stuff I'm not, well versed in. Luxury-wise, how does this car drive in compared to a luxury car? I will say this isn't the nicest example you would find of these cars, and I think if you found a very low mileage example that you would be very, 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 very impressed with how these drive. Because even this car, not all that well maintained, nothing too, nothing new like suspension-wise, stuff for like control arms, like shocks and stuff. I don't know if they're original or not, but even for 30 years later, this car feels pretty good on the road, pretty solid. You don't get a lot of wind noise, you don't get a lot of road noise. It feels good. It feels soft. It feels like a boat. You have very soft suspension, and it just kind of floats around. Like, you hit bumps, you don't feel them all that much. Can it compare to a 2022 7 Series? Not a chance. I mean, you still have to figure in a 30-year-old car that has minimal sound deadening, safety features. I mean, this car has one airbag only and is, I want to say, around 3,600 pounds, 3,700 pounds, could even be less, compared to a modern 7 Series, which would be about, I would say, probably 4,500 pounds, if not more, in today's age. So you still have a pretty stout car, but it does feel nice. Obviously, you have nice hot heat, quiet, actually pretty enjoyable to drive, I have to say. This car has a bit of a ratty exhaust over the years from the rust of the Midwest, so it doesn't sound great from the outside, and the fumes aren't great, but in terms of otherwise road quality, creaks and cracks for a 32-year-old car are actually pretty good. I've talked about it before. 7 Series or 3 Series like E30s really suffer from the road noise and the creaky, but like this interior, like it's pretty solid. Like all the plastics are actually pretty nice. Door cards are on there really good. A lot of them fall apart in the lesser models. Like everything, buttons, switches, they all work really nice. A couple of these buttons on my climate control panel don't work great, but for the most part they do. Check control's broken, but like everything feels pretty quality when you adjust it, like everything works nice. The seats still work nice and quick. It is a very nice feeling car, even in this day and age, and you hit big bumps and you don't get insane creaks and rattles, which I think is a big testament to how well these cars are put together, because you could get in a 2020 base model car and it'll creak around like crazy. Whereas this thing, to this day, is still super solid with how it feels. Now, sportiness factor, and again, in today's age, you can get a luxury 7 Series and it'll be putting down like 500 horsepower. That might be an exaggeration, but definitely a 400s. And it is a pretty quick car by modern standards, which is because it's a modern car. But how does this compare to modern standards, I guess you could say? Let me get my camera here and get you guys a speedometer shot of an acceleration. It's going to get walked by any average Joe car. It is not a fast car by any means. Again, if you opted for a V8 or a V12 car, those are actually fairly quick cars. Is the M30 car a slug? No, but is it fun? I wouldn't say so. Let's give a little speedometer test here. Floor it. 4-speed auto is fighting for its life. And I mean, that's 60. So it's, through the camera, what does that tell you? I don't know. But it honestly gets up to 60 pretty quick. It is not a sluggish car. I don't think you would find in today's era, I don't think you would find yourself struggling to keep up with traffic, because it is, for what it is, with the weight and the power that these M30s made, which I think is like 180 or something, 190 or so, with like 210 torque. You really feel that torque in these cars. And again, you have cars with even more powerful engines, but for the base engine size in this car, I don't think you would be super impressed with how quick it is, but I don't think you'd be disappointed. I definitely do not. It can keep up with regular traffic. If you put this thing next to a 2027 Series, it's going to walk away from you. But what do you expect? Cars get quicker as the years go on. But that's not really true, because even economy cars in today's world are pretty slow. Like, this thing has more power than what you would find on, I think, like a Nissan Altima. So it is kind of interesting how that works over the years. But you got to figure this was the big boat of that era, so it needs a decent sized power plant. And otherwise, sportiness like cornering and stuff, it is not the car for that. You could get away with a 5 Series in the track and corners and spirited driving, but this 7 will leave you body rolling more than you would like in corners, and it just doesn't have, with the auto trans, it doesn't have the fun factor that you'd want from a sportier car. So if you're buying an old 7 Series for sport, not a good idea. If you're buying it for a cheap luxury, I would say it's a decent idea. Jump ahead to 2022, what you're looking at for a car like this. If you're going to get a flagship 7, you're looking at well over $100,000, a ton of amenities and features and stuff like that. Could this car compare to that in today's day and age? Not really. Obviously, a 30-year-old car can't. But could you enjoy a 30-year-old car in the modern world? I would say so. I think to own a car like this, you do have to be a bit of a BMW enthusiast, or have a bit of knowledge, or have a very deep pockets, because as I said earlier, BMW had pretty cutting edge stuff from this time era, and always really. And what that means is that there will be a lot of things that will go wrong, and they are not super easy to figure out. Even me, as nearly an expert in these old BMWs, I had a hard time figuring out a lot of the electrical issues this car was having. And that's what will really get you, is the electrical issues. They are not fun to figure out. They are not forgiving. And that will leave you not wanting to own this car, because it will get very expensive. And the thing I tell a lot of people is, when they send me, this is big with the 05 to like 2010 cars, like the E6X generations. People want to buy a E63, which is the 7 Series of that era, and I will tell you that is the worst BMW I think ever made. The biggest nightmare car you could own. And that is a $100,000 car, which has depreciated so extensively because of the lack of maintenance and the lack of care that they got from the owners that were negligent because they couldn't afford it. And just the way they depreciate is not that cool or nice of a car. They can be had for sub 10 grand. And to the typical casual BMW person, not even BMW person looking to buy an affordable car, they're going to say, wow, I could get this crazy flagship 7 Series for under 10 grand, and I could be in a foreign car, a BMW. And that may sound fun and all and cool and all until you realize that you're buying a $110,000 car for under 10 grand. So how does that depreciation work? That money, where does that money go? How can it be so cheap? That money is going to go to backlog maintenance for the past 15 years. And the maintenance on those cars is extensive. It is confusing. It is difficult. It is dealership grade stuff that they're going to want to do, and they are going to run your pockets. 20, 30, 40 grand in maintenance, depending on how beat up the car is. It will cripple you financially. It is a horrible, horrible idea to buy cars like that. But now something like this, that is now 30 years old, but was made in a time where these cars were made to last. They were made with pride. They were made as overall nice cars. You can easily own this car 30 years later, especially if it's a nice example. I would call this example a bit of a nightmare example with a lot of backlog maintenance as well. But even backlog maintenance on something like this isn't going to break your bank too much. It won't be cheap or easy if you don't have the parts on hand, but it won't kill you like an 07 car will. So take that with a grain of salt. I'm not over here telling the average person to go buy one of these, because I don't think that's really a great idea. But you could buy this in the modern world with a little bit of car knowledge, and I think you could really enjoy it. And I think you would be impressed with its comfort, and I think it would, as a daily driver, I think you would really enjoy it and not be like, this is a shitbox. Because even though they age differently on the outside, that's why I haven't really touched on the outside, rust and stuff, because it doesn't matter wherever you're at, the paint will fade differently, the car will rust differently, so you can't touch on that. The interior, how does the interior hold up? Not very good. You got to figure this car was owned by some big guys back in the day, big businessmen that were probably however many pounds, I don't know, but interior comes down to the build quality and a little bit of how you maintain it, but also just the owners. So you might have owned a car that was owned by a super tiny guy and there's no wear, or in this case, it had to be owned by a huge dude because this driver's seat's destroyed. Can't touch on how a 2020 car will hold up in 30 years with the interior, but I do think these cars have pretty strong interiors, but colors like parchment age horribly, and a lot of things do wear. You get sagging headliner and stuff, which is kind of ugly, and I think the interior color in general is ugly, and the wear that these seats see is ugly, but that's different model to model as well. But you could definitely still hop in this car and, you know, enjoy it, luxury day to day, you know, daily driver. That costs you less than $6,000, which is pretty sweet. So the sound system in the car, pretty good. Obviously, it won't come with a JVC colorful head unit. You'll have a, you know, factory BMW, and it doesn't sound impressive by any means. But the speakers are, I will say, in the 7 Series, pretty good, especially compared to like an E30 or even an E34 at the time. These speakers do sound pretty good in this car. So if you put a sub in it, you put a head unit in it, and you can really play your music as loud as you want, and it won't sound super crisp, but it'll sound good enough. So how does this 7 Series hold up over the past 32 years? Is it still a luxury car? Yeah, I would say so. I would say you do have a lot of nice luxuries to this car, and I think it still drives nice, and it's the perfect balance of, you know, stoutness but also luxury comfort. Getting in it though, will you feel necessarily that luxury if you have a beat up interior? No, you feel like you're kind of in a nasty old box, but that's why we love them, right? So depending on the type of person you are, you could be like, this is a great car, insanely nice, or you'd be like, eh. So the $1 million question of how does it hold up? They hold up pretty good. This car, I would say, is on the rougher side, lack of maintenance, not taken well care of, and it still is overall a fairly nice car that does the job. So these hold up pretty nicely, more than I can say. I bet the 2010 and on cars will hold up, because I think those cars, once they're 30 years old, will be obsolete because of the, you know, the electronics that are in them that will, you know, destroy themselves over the years. So I think these are decent cars, and I think the bang for your buck here is actually pretty impressive. I think to get what was once a $60,000 car for under 10 grand, under 5 grand, is pretty crazy. I think it's a pretty crazy time we live in where you could buy these so cheap. And it's still a nice car. You know, it's not like the E60 cars, which are, you know, just garbage. E65s. They age. This car's obviously aged. We would never look at this from the exterior and be like, wow, it still looks modern. Like, it looks old, looks maybe a little bit ratty to the average person, but still an overall nice car. So I hope that you guys enjoyed this little video. I try to be a little more cinematic with the drone footage. Don't know how to use a drone very well. I try to get a lot of B-roll to keep it interesting while driving. I never did a first drive video on this car once I got it running, but I just figured I'd turn that first drive video into a how it holds up this long after all the years. And I think it was a decent video. If you guys like this video, please let me know. I can make more of these with the other cars. I enjoyed making it. I made it today because this car may be sold later, but we don't know. So anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.